G'day and welcome to Don't Read the Comments, a podcast where we ignore the show's title and actually read online comments relating to something going on in the world of Doctor Who. Tonight, by listener request, we're on the Facebook page of Radio Times, where people are discussing the 7-day viewing figures, the consolidated viewing figures for the Robot Revolution, which was seen by 3.5 million viewers across that time period. There are currently 437 comments at the time of recording. No, we're not reading them all. I'm set to most relevant. Let's go. Rod Maxwell says, it now has a very similar number of viewers to EastEnders. It's remarkable how few people still watch linear television. And straight off the bat, I think, yeah, good comment there, Rod. It's always important not just to look at the overnights, and even not just look at the consolidated figures, but to look at where Doctor Who is sitting relative to other quote-unquote popular shows on television in the UK. EastEnders is a popular soap that's been going for decades. If Doctor Who is in similar territory to that, what does that tell people? Frank McCambridge says, I watched it for the first time since Peter Capaldi left, and it was okay. But it's not Doctor Who anymore. It's difficult to describe just what it is now, but it's not Doctor Who. And that's not quite on topic, but it is interesting from the point of view that this is something we've spoken about on the podcast many times. As any show ages and TV moves on and different showrunners come in, shows evolve, shows change, shows don't offer what you once wanted from a show sometimes. And I think that's probably what Frank's experiencing there. It doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it different. Jess Bain says, who cares? Thoroughly enjoyed both. By which I think she means Robot Revolution and Lux, and good on you, Jess. Good attitude. Andy Smith says, 21st for the week. Not bad, and still a success. I also wonder if these figures include those watching on Disney. Feels fairly healthy viewing figures to me. And that's an interesting question. At face value, my inclination is to say, well, no, Andy, it doesn't include people watching on Disney. They're international figures. But then part of me wonders, if someone in the UK had Disney, could they still watch it on Disney? And my gut feeling is it wouldn't be available on Disney, would it? To UK people, that's probably blocked, as the BBC would have the rights to show it in the UK. Or can people get around that maybe with a VPN or something? But then, why would you want to do that? I don't know. Maybe Andy is just asking, do these include the international figures? No, Andy, it doesn't. A lot more people around the world watch Doctor Who than just 2 million overnight or 3.5 million consolidated. Richard Caulfield says, I unplugged the antenna to get the kids off TV. They've not plugged it back in. They just don't watch linear TV anymore, and neither do I. And yeah, look, if I had $1 for every time I've heard someone say that these days, I have a friend who was saying that 10 years ago, and I found it a little nuts because I watch a reasonable amount of terrestrial television, like particularly news and things like that, but people like this exist, and they have existed for a long time, so I hear that. I get that. Steve Cheney says, personally, I don't care about ratings because I just watch things that I enjoy, rather than things other people are watching. But I have to say, this series so far has been a drastic improvement on the last one. Even if the next episode isn't that great, just leading with strong stories has set the tone far better, and either way, it seems to actually be setting out to be fun. And that's interesting because people like Steve who are saying, this season is so different, they don't realise that it was made at the same time as the first season. All they see is that a year has gone by and they've gone away and made this new season, and that's not actually what's happened. So I do wonder how much of this improvement is just psychological and how much is actually there on screen. I will say that in terms of second episodes, Lux was better than The Devil's Cord, so maybe it's a 50-50. David Lavender says, watching television is completely different now than it was 15 years ago when the show was at its peak. iPlayer was still relatively new. Netflix was only just starting streaming and was still partly a postal rental service, and everyone was still watching linear TV. The media landscape is different now. The majority of people stream, not watch linear TV. Audiences are more fragmented than ever. Doctor Who still makes the BBC a ton of money. The team may change, but the show, even after a lengthy hiatus, will go on. And I think what David's referring to there when he says hiatus isn't probably the reports that Doctor Who may go off the air, but that there will be a hiatus of sorts between Season 2 and Season 3. Even if Disney turns around at the end of Season 2 and says, okay, that was good enough, let's have another contract for another couple of seasons like we did for Seasons 1 and 2. Russell still has to get his scripts in order. He's got the stories, but he's got to get his scripts in order. He's got to get other writers on board. Pre-production has to happen. Sets have to be built. We definitely won't be having a Christmas episode this year, and we certainly won't be having Doctor Who come back at, March, April next year, because the show's simply not in the can. If anything, I think they'd miss a year at least and come back in March, April of 2027. Tarquin Hoskins says, just proves few people watch BBC anymore. And yeah, I think that's fair. In the age of streaming, there are so many streaming services. People aren't just going to the BBC, people in the UK, for their entertainment. That's self-evident. James Chapman says, interesting that more people watched live, overnight figure 2 million, than via iPlayer over 7 days, 1.57 million. And that's an interesting comment. That's the other side of the coin, because we're sitting here and we're all acknowledging that the TV market is fragmented. Yes, it is. People are turning away from terrestrial television. They watch on streaming. Yes, they do. All of these things are true statements. And yet, it's equally true what James is saying here. The overnight figure for the Robot Revolution was 2 million people. 2 million people watched this on terrestrial television. But in that first 7 days, only 1.57 million watched on streaming. And so taken in isolation, terrestrial television was still more popular than streaming in this one example. Now, is that the case in all examples? No, it's not. I think this is a much more nuanced topic. But I think it's very important to also consider a comment like James's comment here, because it is perfectly true as well. Chris Morley says, both opening episodes have been triumphs of vision over thin plots. Wait a minute, what do you mean both opening? How can they both be opening episodes? I think what Chris means is the opening episode and the second episode that followed the week after. They've been triumphs of vision over thin plots, he says. I find streaming is easier now as Doctor Who isn't exactly unmissable anymore, and I've other commitments during the day. And that's really important to consider when we also talk about 28-day consolidateds. People don't find Doctor Who unmissable anymore, as Chris says, to use his words, and they will watch a week later, 2 weeks later. Those people aren't included in the 7-day figure. 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, and so on. And Thomas Corking says, so, decent figures by TV standards of today. I mean, I watched it on iPlayer before it aired on TV, as I imagine many others watched, in their leisure, in their own time. TV ratings just don't mean anything anymore. Not many people watch live anymore. We live in the age of streaming platforms, and now we've flipped again from the last comment back to, we're in the age of streaming. More people do this. I'll just say, generally, I think that's right, although in the example we used a moment ago, it wasn't right. More people watch Doctor Who overnight on TV than they did on streaming in that first week. My takeaway from all of this, guys, is Doctor Who ratings are what they've always been. There are overnight figures. They're becoming increasingly irrelevant. There are consolidated figures which give you a great picture of where things are really at when it comes to the fan base watching the show, whether they're watching through streaming or whether they're watching it live still. And the third metric that doesn't get spoken about enough is the comparison to other shows on the day. So you can see where Doctor Who is at, rather than these YouTube Muppets who come up with an arbitrary figure in their head, and if Doctor Who doesn't get to that number, then it's failed, and it is just an arbitrary figure. Or comparing it to an old episode, like, in 1982 an episode got this, and this episode in 2025 didn't get the same. Ergo, there's a problem. No, you're not comparing apples and apples. I think there's real value in comparing Doctor Who to what else is happening on television, and I believe in the case of the second episode this season, Lux, on the day on the BBC, it was the 4th most watched show and was almost the 3rd most watched show, and that was with overnights of only 1.5 million. So if you can be the 3rd most watched show on TV, on the BBC at least, with 1.5 million, you can see where the TV landscape is. It's radically different to what it once was, and comparing, don't even go back to the 80s, just comparing Doctor Who of 2025 to Doctor Who of 2011 or something, it's not comparable. And yet, because the folk on YouTube, the YouTube Muppets as I call them, don't like the current era and want to bag it, they want to slate it, they want to have a go at it with any numbers they have to hand, they will be disingenuous. They will compare apples and oranges and hope that their baked-in audience will just nod and go, yes, that's right, yes, and not think too hard. But I think Doctor Who show fans are smart, I think you do think a bit harder than that, and you can see the bigger picture. And I think this has been an enlightening look at how people have reacted to the first lot of consolidated figures for Season 2 of Doctor Who. And on that note, I've been Rob. This is Don't Read the Comments. Do stay tuned to the Doctor Who show over the days ahead. Tomorrow, on Friday, we have a synopsis of the Doctor Who EDA Father Time. On Saturday, we have a hot take, of course, of the new episode The Well. And on Sunday, we have our monthly show for the month of April, talking about Father Time, the show we're doing the synopsis about 2 days earlier. Very timey-wimey. Hope you're enjoying this show. It's still finding its legs. We will get Dave on an episode, I'm sure, when he's not tied up with the federal election. But until then, take care.